Well, folks, I will say that as I was watching you from the back a while back, I noticed so many people taking notes and writing notes for our question board. I see there are a bunch posted already, which is wonderful. So please keep that up. I'm sure you'll have many other questions now with the speakers who are on the rest of our agenda. It's my privilege now to introduce Jeff Stewart, who is the coordinator of programs and services for the Immigrant Worker Project. I was intending to introduce Jeff as director of IWP, but upon reading his bio and the mission statement of his organization and their goals and objectives, I realized that Jeff much prefers to emphasize the heart and soul of all who support IWP rather than its leadership structure for the reason for its success. Founded in 1998, working in 29 counties of Ohio, with the statewide office located in Canton and originally in Wooster, the Immigrant Worker Project is dedicated to the struggle for justice and human dignity for rural immigrants in Ohio. It has since expanded its outreach to other areas and has shown a deep commitment to economic, legal, political, and social justice for the Latinx community. I draw your attention to the IWP website, where its full list of advocacy services is well laid out. To highlight just one, I would tell you about the Amigos Cooperative, a project which provides training in community leadership and service for women who have fled violence in Central America and Mexico. Members of the Amigos Cooperative are encouraged to develop skills that provide them with economic support. In fact, your lunch today is provided by the Amigos Cooperative, and the proceeds from the free will offering box at the serving table will be given to the Amigos workers. Jeff Stewart has worked in community organizations and community education for over 50 years. He is, in my view, the epitome of the servant leader. Please welcome Jeff to the podium.
Thank you. I truly know I'm in church because the empty rows in front we've gotten. And my actual title is Coordinator of Chaos. And that makes sense because working with people, accompanying new immigrants coming to the region, the area, the 29 counties we work in, is a chaotic work. It's work where you never know what's going to be happening one day to the next. I was hoping to have more of our team here today, but some of our team we've got 500 people coming to Canton, Ohio for passports and matricula consulares today, where we're hosting a mobile consulate from Guatemala. So most folks are over there working. And as I said, the food today is from Amigos Cooperative. Just to give you a little bit of background about the Amigos Cooperative. And by the way, anything that you eat today that you like was done by the Amigos. Anything that you tried today that you didn't like, that was by one of the rest of us. So, okay. The Amigos Cooperative was formed in the middle of the 1910s, 1910s. Well, it makes sense that we start to think backwards, right? So I was going to mention this later on, but we talked a bit about some of the legal changes that are going on. The big one that we're confronting right now is going back to 1798. I didn't know if any of you knew this, but the proposal is to use the Alien and Sedition Act to detain and deport people from this point on. So the Alien Sedition Act has been used multiple times in both the 19th and 20th centuries. And it's been upheld by the Supreme Court. And it would allow on various occasions, and it would allow the executive branch of the government in time of war or invasion, to then detain without court processes, without access to any type of judicial system indefinitely, immigrants from the country that is invading the United States, as well as their descendants. So that means that U.S. citizen children could also be detained. And so it's still a little, I didn't want everybody to be too happy, so. That's what we may be looking at in the not too distant future. So what I'd like to talk today about is who's here. Basically tracing and you've seen images of the project that just give you something to look at so you don't have to look at me. I'm going to talk about from the start of the project, 98, the mid-1990s, to today, and sort of the movements of people that we see coming in, and why people were coming in, how they were coming in, okay? But before I say that, I want to make one thing really clear, because I think we all have a misconception of how people are coming to the United States. We should always remember that 50% of everybody who is here undocumented came here as a visa overstay. So 50% of the people that are here did not come across the southern border, but came as a visa overstay, okay? And that means that, and that's the reason why, I mean, big groups that we are always talking about in the news, I'm sure, we have over 350,000 undocumented Irish, okay? And I'm sure you hear about that a lot. And so I think that's something to keep in mind when we talk about immigration and migration, is how people are coming here. You know, we were talking before about how many people are using CB1 now or getting paroled into the country. We have the humanitarian parole for the 4 nations that are coming in from Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, and we've got lots of folks coming from Haiti right now in this region, okay, and Venezuela. And of course, everybody across the country is seeing a lot of Venezuelans come in. So I think we should think about not just always thinking about that folks, newcomers that are coming into our midst, are coming just because they're coming across the southern border and just coming here and coming across the border without permission, okay? But many people are coming to the border and going right in and asking for permission. As was said earlier, we work in 29 counties, but and by the way we structure our counties, we've got them broken down into 9 regions, and the way we developed the regions was we saw who was playing soccer against each other. And so we overlaid our regions by the soccer leagues, because we assumed if there was a soccer league, that meant that there was interconnections, and that would meant that there was some type of connections going back and forth between folks. But our first office, our first statewide office, was here in Wooster. And then we moved to Canton in 2003. We have 7 satellite offices across the state. So when we started our organization, or our organization was formed, it came about just because of the questions you're coming here to ask. There were new people coming into the region here in the Wayne County area, in Tuscarawas County, in Stark, in other counties. We were working with the community organization, several of us in Cleveland at the time, and we were asked to basically find out why people were coming and where they're coming from and why are they here. And so that's how we started, was going out and talking to people. And that's what we still do. We go out and talk to people every day. We meet with people, because of the main job and the best thing that you can do if you decide to jump in and do anything is just to accompany people. There is no bigger mission than accompanying people through their daily lives. Okay. So at that time, during the 90s, there were new populations coming up, and and a lot of people were coming up because of work. So it was a lot of workplace migration. In particular, say, for example, just as one example, in Tuscarawas and Stark County, there were a lot of people coming up to work in the poultry factories. And we have a very detailed analysis of how that happened because of a class action lawsuit done by Texas Legal Aid against one of the poultry companies, where they showed in detail how folks were being recruited illegally, may I say, from Texas areas, the border towns, and also from Florida to come to Ohio to work in conditions that were abysmal, okay, and conditions that in a lot of ways remained hidden. I think it really came to the forefront in the popular press when there was a fire in Canton, Ohio, where there was about 60 folks that were put on the street from Guatemala that nobody knew were even there, and then all of a sudden they were homeless. A lot of people were coming in to work in light manufacturing, and a lot of people were coming in to do what we like to call as near green industries. That is, coming in to do egg processing, to do, by the way, if you didn't know it, Ohio is the largest egg producer in the United States, okay? So we sort of flip around. It's either us or Georgia. We go back and forth, okay? And we've had, and the one company that's been big in the news several times, it used to be called Buckeye Egg, and now it's Trillium, is recently, not too recently, but about 10 years in the news as Trillium because they were bringing in unaccompanied minors that were being brought up and then housed and held and being forced to work as forced labor at the egg plant. Okay, so these kids were being brought in with a forced labor scheme where people from their own community would go down to the border and say they were the relatives of these kids with the consent of the parents or other people because they thought, oh, they'll get our kid out of the shelter, right? And then they would take them in, and they took them to trailers where they had no access to anybody and wouldn't let them go to school, even though some of them were 13 and 14, and started them basically working in the egg processor. All right? That's things that have been unchanged over the time that we've had the project, over 25 years we've been working in the project. Youth labor has been a problem throughout, right? It's infamous in the sanitation crews that work in a lot of the slaughterhouses. So a lot of the sanitation crews are mostly underage workers, okay? And I'm glad to say that today, where most of the IWP team is today, working in the mobile consulate, one of the things we were able to do was, through pressure, change that, because one of the problems that comes in is that many of the unaccompanied minors that are coming in have access to work permits. They're in a process where they've got an ongoing legal case, and they can get a work permit, but they can't get a work permit unless they have a governmental ID from back home. But think about it, they're unaccompanied minors. So how are they going to get a governmental ID? Because to get a passport or to get a matricula consular, you need your parents there to sign off to get that. Or if not, you need them to go to a office from in your home country of the Ministry of the Exterior, go sign a form that says you're giving them permission to get that. Both parents have to do that. And then that form has to be transferred back to the consulate in the United States. And then that form has to they have to get the passport within 60 days of that form initially being signed. And so it can't happen. And so we were contacted by the Labor Department that says, how can we stop all of these kids from working? We want to, because they're working in situations that are dangerous. Okay, we've had one of the kids that had his arm peeled because of this chicken skinner. So it basically skinned his arm down. We had another kid that just after he turned 17, he was 1 week after he's 17, he lost his leg. He lost his leg because he was told by the sanitation crew to go up on a step stool, stand on a wet tub, on the edge of that wet tub, to reach over and turn off a valve and turn on the valve to empty the water in the machine while he was cleaning it. Okay, and of course he fell in and then he lost his leg. And these things are happening in lots of ways. These kids could be working somewhere else, but they can't, because they can't get the right documentation. So we were able to then pressure or convince, better, nicer word, convince the Guatemalan consulate that it was in their interest for these kids to allow the children to at least get a counselor ID. If you can't get them a passport because they sign off, at least give them a counselor ID. And so today, we're actually processing 150 youth in the first half of the consulate today for unaccompanied minors to get their counselor ID, so then we can go get their work permits. That sort of speaks to some of the stuff that we do. The work we do is everything. Okay, and the reason we do everything is because our philosophy is, if somebody says, "Hey, can you help me with this?" Our response is yes. Even if we don't know how to do it, we're going to try to figure out how to do it. Okay, and so that's one of the things. It gets us into a lot of trouble, and it means that we do a lot of work and work long hours. And I can see we have two of our student interns here today, and I can see them their worried looks on their faces. But it's something that we found that's worked well. So, for example, let me talk about the food you're going to eat. As I said a few minutes ago, in the 2010s, we started to have a lot of women and children crossing the border. It was women and children fleeing from Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, fleeing in the Central American countries mostly from gang violence and the risk that their children stood with the gangs, in Mexico from the cartels. In this part of Ohio, when those women and children came, after they got from the border, and many of the women and children we worked with were part of the groups that were separated from their children, including one of the people that cooked for you today. She was separated from her children for about 10 days. Her children were 7 and 9 years old at the time. They were taken into one of those converted Walmarts where they were put into the cages with aluminum foil blankets. And they were asked, the two brothers asked if they could be in the same cage together, the same detention cell, and they told them no, and they put them all the way at the end apart from each other. And then they put her into a different holding cell, the heladera, the cooler, where they had the temperatures way down, and they left the lights on for 24 hours a day. And they would do a roll call every hour and a half. So every hour and a half, they would get everybody up and have them do a roll call and see who was there. And then every 8 hours or so, a detention officer would come in front of her and hand her a sheet and say, if you want to be reunited with your kids, if you sign this deportation order, you can be back with your kids right away. You know, you and your kids can just go home. And for 10 days she suffered that and survived it, because what she had fled back home was so severe and so violent that she knew she had to stay. So she gets here, as many of these other women and children that were fleeing got here, and here in the Ohio ICE office, what they were doing at that time is they were putting the women on GPS ankle bracelets. The ankle bracelets would stay on for sometimes 1 to 2 years so that they could track everywhere they were. And so they had these GPS ankle bracelets put on, and they had to check in at ICE. The first 2 months you checked in every 2 weeks, and then I see Dan nodding because he's taken a lot of people up for these check-ins. And then after that, every month a monthly check-in. So even if you've got a process that's going to allow you to get a workplace authorization, how are you going to work when you've got an ankle bracelet that, by the way, talks to you? So if it doesn't pick up a signal, or it starts to not have enough charge, it starts to say, charge your unit, charge your ankle bracelet. So you're in a workplace. How are you going to work with these things happening? You can't. And so what we did is we formed a cooperative, the Amigas Cooperative, which does catering, janitorial services. Now we've got some people working in offices. It's not a lot of folks, but we've got about overall about 31 members, some working part-time, just doing catering things, and some doing full-time jobs. And as a cooperative member, you're allowed to take a profit, okay, even if you're not authorized to work. So it's a bit of a loophole in the IRS code, for those of you don't know that want to now form a cooperative. Okay, and so it allows somebody to work without work authorization as long as they're only taking a profit. So one of the things IWP does is we take no administrative overhead, okay, for the cooperative. We just do a pass-through, and we basically take in what we're invoicing the companies, the churches, or the other people that are doing that, and then pass it out to folks. This year, the cooperative is going to pass out to cooperative members $380,000. So it's not big, but it's not small. We're getting there. So that's some of the work we do. And so that was a group that was coming in the 2010s. Also in the 2010s, another group that we started to see were the unaccompanied minors. So IWP, and one of our other jobs is we provide legal services and legal referrals for immigrants that are coming in. And that started out to be a very minor piece of our work to start with. So at the beginning, I would say that was about 30% of our work. But when we started, it was in the Clinton administration, and he passed the Life Act, which allowed some people to adjust their status using, it basically reinstalled a piece of the immigration code that we always keep advocating to be reinstalled, which is the 245I clause. It lets somebody who has a legitimate claim to be able to adjust status to pay a penalty and adjust status. It's been out of the immigration code since the end of April of 2001. Okay. One of the other pieces, just to go back a second I'm sorry if I bounce around a bit, but one thing leads to another. So I'm a chaotic theory. I'm a chaotic thinker. But one of the other things, just in terms of advocacy for you to think about, is another piece of the immigration code. It is the first immigration reform. Okay. It was passed in the 1930s. It was initially passed because everybody who came, the right way, okay? My grandparents, my great-grandparents, they all came the right way. Well, unfortunately, no. So a lot of people bypassed ports of entry, and so they weren't registered, and so they didn't have status. And so in the 1930s, a thing called registry was passed, which if you had been here for X amount of years, you had a clean record, and you could prove your continuous presence from your entry point, you could apply for permanent residency. Every time the immigration code was tinkered with, okay, they would move the registry date up. Right? And then, in the last time it was worked on by that great, liberal reformer Ronald Reagan, okay, who gave us our last big immigration code reform, which is the Immigration Act of 1986. Okay, they moved it up to 1972. Since then, the registry date has not moved. Right? So think of this for a second. If you just move the registry date forward to 14 years from today, okay, how many people would be allowed to adjust status solely on having a good record and doing that, and some of the problems that we had, right? But it's not, it's sort of like the minimum wage. It just never moves again. So it's just stuck there. And so registries, those two pieces, if those two pieces were passed, forget about comprehensive immigration reform, if we passed the updating of the registry date and we passed the reinstallation of 245I, that would help millions of people. And so those are two changes for you to think about when you think about advocacy and things that you can do. Anyways, so we started to get unaccompanied minors. Unaccompanied minors is a classification that comes out of the Wilbur-Weatherforce human trafficking law, passed in 2008. IWP started representing unaccompanied minors in 2009. So we got our first 17 cases then, and we've worked with over 4,000 since then. These are kids, think of this for a second, these are kids under 18 years old that come across the border by themselves. We've worked with kids as young as 5 years old that with somebody from their village has come across the border without their parents. The vast majority are in their teen years. They're coming in. Many of them are coming in because they're trying to live a life free of the violence that they're suffering. Violence that, by the way, is probably not enough for them to ever win an asylum claim, because winning an asylum claim because you're fearful of the gangs killing you is not a winnable asylum claim. But they're coming because perhaps you want to go to school and you can no longer go to school because maybe you start off and you go to your primary school, your elementary school, which is maybe in your aldea, your village. But then you got to go to básico. You've got to go to middle school. And when you're going to middle school, you have to walk 2.5 hours. And that's where the gangs are waiting for you, to threaten you, to try to coerce you, to try to get you to join the gang. And when you talk to kids time and time again, why did you stop going? And a lot of times, this is the thing that always strikes me and always it frightens me. The violence that the people we work with or walk with suffer is so internalized that many times they don't see it as violence. So I will ask a juvenile doing an intake, why, are you afraid of anything? No, no, I'm not afraid. I said, you're not afraid? No. I said, but I noticed that you stopped going to school when you entered básico. Oh, yeah. Well, why'd you stop going to school? Well, there were these guys, there were these cholos. This is usually the word, It's a sort of a cholo is not a transnational gang. It's sort of localized. There's different levels of gang hierarchy. And these are cholos, and they were bad people, and they wanted me to do bad things, and I didn't want to do it. Well, what happened? Well, one day they threw me to the ground, and they kicked me until they bruised me all over. And then what happened? Well, then I was going the next time I was trying to go to school, and they threw me down. They put a gun to my head and said they were going to shoot me if I didn't join. But you don't fear going home? No, because that violence is so internalized that they don't even see that as violence against them. They see that as a daily life. And so that's the group of unaccompanied minors that are coming in. I think I've just got a couple, 2 minutes, okay? I just want to talk about, for 1 second, that's, by the way, that's one of our interns out teaching English in a camp. That's a leadership group when we were meeting with a leadership group from Maryland. That's a Kania leadership group that we meet with. Some of the changes we're seeing now. So another group that's coming in large numbers, besides the fact that we're getting a lot of Haitians coming in, we're getting a lot of Venezuelans, a lot of Ecuadorians to this region. And of course, you're here in Worcester, and so it would go without saying a lot of Peruvians, right? By the way, the neighborhood that the people are coming in from Peru to here to Worcester is El Agustin. It's a neighborhood I know very well. My brother-in-law's brother, he was a parish priest there for 25 years, so I've been in El Agustin a lot. It's the roughest, poorest, harshest neighborhood of all of Lima. Okay. And that's where most of the Peruvians that are coming here to Wooster are coming from, that same neighborhood. But the other group that's coming now is a lot of H-2A workers. So what's happened is, where we used to have migrant farm workers coming up in family units, many times coming from Brownsville, Texas, stopping on the way in another place, and then coming to Ohio, or coming from Douglas, Georgia, or coming from Lakeland, Florida, and they would come up with their families, come here and come to the different camps and stay, keeping the family together. Now what's happened is, because of immigration enforcement, the growers are concerned that they can't bring folks in. They're worried about documentation and what's going to happen. And so most of the growers in Ohio are converting to H-2A program, which is a temporary agricultural program, where you have solitary males coming up to stay for anywhere from 9 to 5 months, 4 months by themselves without their families. Okay, and then going back. And so that's one of the other big changes we're seeing in this region right now. Okay. One of the areas we're working is Willard, Ohio. They're bringing in 1,800 workers directly from Mexico. And so some of the other changes that we're seeing. I think my time's run out, yeah. Yes, okay, thank you.